Hi, folks. Good afternoon. I will be pretty much silent as my children are still awake.
Okay.
So I spare you all the background noise. Hi, Emilia.
We have missed you.
Yeah,
Welcome back.
I was on conferences and so on, and just came home from a job in Tyrolia. So yeah, it was quite busy last days.
Oh, welcome back.
Thanks.
Okay, so this is Kevin Sutter, and today is the Hangout for the MicroProfile. We do it every other week. John is out on vacation this week, so I'm covering for him. We've got a couple of new things on the agenda today. I'm not sure, we might adjust the order here a little bit. But as always, everybody on the call, help keep track of the minutes. I posted out to the chat link to the minutes, and I see that people are putting their names out there, so that's all good. And if there's items that we need to keep track of, please help with taking minutes. The line is recorded, so we should have something to post after the meeting here. So the first thing that I kind of wanted to do was to go through the MicroProfile 3.0 platform, a quick status update. I haven't heard anything from Antoine recently. Does anybody else know the current status of the health check 2.0?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Martin is speaking. Well, basically, we are struggling now to get merge of the pull request, which will introduce readiness and liveness. But after that, I think we should be able to get into 3.0. What is the deadline?
The various deadlines off the top of my head, I can't remember, but they are out on our Google Calendar. If we're shooting the MicroProfile 3.0, we're shooting for a June release, which means that it's sometime in May is when the individual components would have to be ready so that we can submit the request to the Eclipse PMC.
Yeah, that's 15 May then. Okay, I think that we should be able to do that.
Okay, very good, because I reached out a couple of times to Antoine, but I haven't heard anything, and so I'm glad to hear a status on that. Thank you, Martin.
No worries.
Okay, the next one, metrics. I know I've talked with Don here at IBM. How about other Heiko? How's metrics 2.0 looking?
I mean, we are into technically doing snapshots, but more or less already in RC mode for 2.0. But we haven't really officially called it RC yet. Okay. And we do have a topic later that's in the agenda, which we want to have solved either way before we post an RC.
Okay, thank you. And REST client, anybody else? I know I've talked with Andy here at IBM about it. Anybody else, any other participants that can speak to the REST client 1.3? Oh, it looks like Andy is on. Andy, are you on mute?
Yeah, it's kind of noisy in my work area right now, but so I missed the question, sorry.
Just looking for a quick status on REST Client 1.3 and how it's looking for MicroProfile 3.0.
Oh, yeah, I'd say we're in good shape for MicroProfile 3.0 this summer. We've got one or two more items to integrate, but it's come along good.
So I don't think I've seen anything. You haven't started any of the RC candidates yet?
No.
Okay.
We could do that this week. We have a meeting tomorrow. We can bring that up then.
Okay. Okay, but still looking good for a June release then.
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay. Any other, I know that, we have some other projects that are looking at standalone releases. I'm not including that as part of a platform release, but anybody want to bring up any status related to the standalone components that are being developed?
It's not something. I was just wondering if there was going to be an Open API 2.0, because I think earlier in the year there was a discussion on the mailing list suggesting there might be.
Yeah, so we haven't heard anything related to that recently. Anybody else? Okay. I just made note of it. We'll try to reach out to the team and see if there are any plans for that or not. Okay. So the next item on the agenda, I had put down, I wanted to have a team demo some technology that we've been playing with and experimenting with within IBM, but I was wondering if maybe Don and Heiko, maybe you kind of want to do your metric stuff first, because if the other thing turns into a lot of discussion, then it might use up the rest of the time. What do you think, Heiko?
Sure. So basically what we have been doing is, or let me start the other way around. Originally, MicroProfile was meant as the single server, single application use case that servers like Zontail, Wildfire Swarm have embraced. And what we have seen is that other kind of servers are also able to deploy more than one application. And the metric spec has some base statistics that are server-wide, and then also a scope for application-specific metrics. And now it could be that you have two applications on your server running in parallel that both expose a metric called with the name of foo, and this would clash, be it in the internal registry for different data type, and also in the output that basically you wouldn't see only one variable foo, where the values are arbitrarily increased. And to solve that, we are thinking of basically adding a differentiator between the two applications. Ideally, or not ideally, but we were thinking that other specifications like Open API have the same issue as we do, that when you deploy multiple applications, you need to differentiate them. For Open API, it may be possible to put the endpoint under the /Open API global one, or not on this one, but also under the application context. So if you have a /foo and a /bar app, then it would be /foo/Open API and /bar/Open API. This does not exactly work for metrics, just because we have the base metrics that are server-wide, and if you expose them on both /foo/metrics and /bar/metrics, you duplicate them, and it's also a setup nightmare for those ops people that need to scrape the metrics from the servers, because they need to configure multiple endpoints per server. So for us, the solution would be to add sort of a label, a tag, and differentiator as the application name for the case that you have more than one application deployed on the server. If you only have one application, then this is void. There is no change at all. And now I was mentioning Open API because we were thinking this could be something that others also need, and it could be something that is MicroProfile wide. There have been some voices that don't particularly like that, be it an MP wide standard. So we could also, let's say, get back on the only metric spec level. but it would be sad if others would then introduce their own way of doing this. And then we also have a bit of a discussion about, well, MicroProfile is not supposed to be for multi-apps, but only the single app, single server concept. And this is where we stand, and this is why we are bringing it up to here.
Heiko, allow me a question mark here. What is the real problem with just having two endpoints exposing the metrics information? For example, if you have a circuit breaker information, then it might be completely different whether it's served from application A or from application B. So why not have two endpoints expose their information separately?
As I said, there are two issues with that. The first issue is that the base metrics, base and vendor scope, would be exposed in both endpoints. The second one is that for people to set up the monitoring of this server, they would need to configure two endpoints in their monitoring app. They could not just have one app scrape/metrics endpoint and retrieve all the data in one go.
Yeah, I think I'd add just a good example of that in practice would be in Kubernetes when you set up Prometheus, it automatically scrapes pods that are configured to have a Prometheus IO/scrape annotation on the pod. So the nice thing about that is it just calls to those pods and calls their /metrics endpoint. You can configure that URL if you wanted to. So if we had, say, an application context route, you could call that, but suddenly you go from sort of a simple deployment environment where you might have lots of deployments in the day going to different pods being set up, to now having to change your Prometheus configuration for each of these different apps, which starts to be just a headache for people that are trying to get their operations set up. So,
yeah, but if you serve two applications from the same host, you have to separate it somehow, and the metric numbers per application might be totally different.
Yes, this is right. This is why we say we want to introduce this application name, which then puts a label on the individual time series, so that you have two time series, whatever foo counter, and then with app equals 1, and the other one is foo counter with app equals 2, as the two labels to separate the two. So you can then scrape them from this one endpoint again.
And you...
Sorry, Heiko. Is this the first time? Did we start a thread? Did you guys start a thread on this already?
Yes,
we did.
There is a thread, but this did not really come to a conclusion.
Okay.
I mean, again, we can just...
I thought the thread concluded we should discuss on this call.
No, of course. What I'm saying is that is it possible for you to add the link to the thread in here? When I saw the agenda, I had no idea what you guys were talking about. When you assume that when we jump into this call, we will know, or we will be catch up with the forum, totally mistaken. You need to give us the beef so that we know what you're talking about. This is great. However, it needs to start. This is the thread. It started. We need much more information. Just show the problem and tell us, because that is much more efficient for today, for the future, for everything. That's my feedback directly.
Yeah, fair enough, Amelia. On that one, that was my write up in the forum, but I'll keep that in mind. So I'll dig up. Just give me a minute. I'll dig up the.
Thank you so much.
I have it already. This forum link.
I want to say something. We have 35 plus increasing members here, and for everyone here, the agenda goes as follows. Write your name in parentheses. Always add links if there is something that will help in the conversation. You cannot expect anyone to know. Everyone can bring any issues, anything that you will want to do with MicroProfile. So continue. Just want to close this feedback.
Yep.
Yes. So basically, I mean, I would be, let me say happy, or it would be enough for me to say this is something that is just within the metrics spec. I'm fine with that. It's certainly something where I think we should have it not have in two specs within a MicroProfile different configuration variables, names, whatever, configuration keys for this, but more like an umbrella effort, if at all.
Right. So I think the most contentious part, and why it kind of was suggested that we bring it here, was just an overall question: should MicroProfile cater to multi-application environments? And if we do start to put application names, are we in some way, I guess, violating the initial point of MicroProfile? And I don't know if I'm paraphrasing that right. Ken, I see you're on the call too. Maybe you want to comment on sort of your perspective on it.
So I guess, just quickly from my side, as our, I guess you could say, mission statement for MicroProfile is optimizing Java, enterprise Java for microservices architecture. To me, that means single deployment servers. And my big concern here is if we start doing things that are multi-deployment, then that opens a can of worms for what people want to start adding to MicroProfile to handle multi-server deployments that are completely unrelated to microservices in any way.
You know, like this goes into growing pains. The call that we had 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago, I can't even remember. Ken, you were there. And we are talking about going back into the core and revising what we will need or MicroProfile needs. And the calls will continue to happen. And I think this is not something that we can solve today, exactly speaking, because as much flexibility, no, I will give the chance to someone else to say, but as much flexibility as we want to give the coders, those ones that want to create amazing features to add to MicroProfile, how much is needed in what do we use or not, and what is the value of this? Do you have a sandbox where you have worked this exact extension, I would call it?
I think the reality that we are facing these days is that MicroProfile metrics is being used already in servers that are multi-deployment. And either we just say, well, we don't care, it's an implementation detail of these servers, or we say, okay, perhaps we just add this little piece here and then have first can reuse what MicroProfile metrics is doing, and second, have a consistency around all these servers. I mean, in the past, when you look many years back, all kinds of operations were so much tied into the individual runtime implementation that you could never really run two servers in a consistent manner or remotely consistent manner. And having this functionality would allow that, and would make it much easier to, let's say, jump from Tommy Tribe to Wildfly Swarm, or to full Wildfly, or to Open Liberty.
Okay. So you're saying, if we choose to add this into the process, the user will be free to use different platforms. I'm a plus one. If anything, open source is about freedom to use between platforms. But this goes beyond that, Hego. The idea sounds great, but the implementation and making it a process. Someone else super technical needs to go into this.
Yeah.
So I would like to say I have had conversations with people who do want to use MicroProfile metrics in a non-microservice-based deployment because they like the programming model and they like the ability to extract through the standard REST API the monitoring information. So I think whilst I agree that I wouldn't want us to make every spec implement every, multiple applications, I do kind of wonder whether metrics is actually an area where there should be an exception so people can make use of it in those runtimes that do support multiple applications in a non-microservice deployment.
Alice Dar, you need to say, this is Alice Dar. I recognize your voice, but everyone else here.
Okay.
Can
So this is Alistair from IBM.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Could we accommodate both options, in the sense that maybe add some kind of tag or something, or configuration parameter, so that if you choose one one parameter or one value, it'll add the tag, the app name to the tag or not.
I think that was the start of the conversation that Heiko was mentioning, but I know Kevin's been desperately trying to get a word in, so let's give him some space.
Normally, I don't have to worry about someone giving me airtime. So, no, the thing is with whatever direction we go here, I think we have to stick with a default. I mean, like what Cesar just mentioned about, could we have this configurable? Okay, so even if we go that route, we got to make sure that the single application is the default, and that's what would normally come out. And I think Heiko had mentioned that earlier, that nothing would change.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so, I guess I hadn't thought about it from the standpoint of what Alistair pointed out about possibly using this in a non-microservice environment, because I was about ready to back up Ken and say that, we probably shouldn't be doing this. But now, if it is being used outside of a microservice environment, then maybe that is something that we could entertain as a configurable option.
The question that I would have is from a like a Prometheus and metrics perspective is, my understanding of those systems is that everything has to get boiled down to simple key values, which are traced over time. So doesn't that mean that we would have to effectively come up with just a more complicated key?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's before we had the ability to add tags to our metrics, that would kind of be just make a more complicated key, right? Add the app name into the key.
Right.
The Prometheus way of doing things is certainly to label your metrics. So, for example, Prometheus adds in Kubernetes specific labels when it monitors. So you don't even have to do that from your endpoint. It will actually add in things like the namespace and the cluster and pod name for you. So this application would be sort of another label on the metric, so you could further identify which server it came from or which application it came from.
Right. So
Don, you're talking about this will be optional as an extension, an extension of metrics.
So in servers that support multiple deployments, this would be something that they would use to, I guess, provide a differentiation in the metric labels, so that you'd be able to tell that the hit count is the hit count from application A instead of the hit count from application B. Right, and that shows up all the way to the dashboards that you see, right? Because at the end of the day, you're just going to be looking at a Grafana dashboard or something like that, and that's going to have hundreds of metrics, and whether they came from endpoint A or endpoint B, that's not really the thing that's actually going to help you differentiate. It's really what's the name of the metric, and that's a combination of just the hit count part plus the labels that say things like it came from this container and it came from this app. So it's sort of a more standard way in that world to try and differentiate your metrics, so that you can tell which pod it came from, which app it came from, and any other labels that you want to add to it.
Yeah, and I guess in that case, if one app is exposing it is not running really well, and there are more than one application on a single runtime, then the other runtimes, the other application on the runtime might suffer from the one not being able to get healthy again. And then you have to shut down maybe more than one application, because the microservices way is restart one application because it's not healthy, right? So you might drag down more applications with it because of one is now effectively exposing that it's not running healthy via the metrics.
Yes, but I mean, this is an orthogonal concern. This would also be the case if you would expose the metric under the context root of the individual applications, and you would have done that before. I mean, I understand the problem, but it's not getting worse due to exposing the metrics these ways. It's just orthogonal to it. I've put an example for some fictional Prometheus output format at the page, where you see the app equals app1 and app equals app2 labels are used to separate these metrics for the two running applications. The little 3 dots, 2 dots, 3 dots, the ellipsis basically means other labels that are in here, and then the my app val is the counter gauge, whatever you are exposing through MicroProfile metrics.
Yeah. So what?
And the third line is basically this. Sorry, Kevin, the single deployment counter. So that this one app is one server, where you just do not have the app equals app name label.
Yeah. So the thing that you guys are proposing is having that new app tag so that you could differentiate between the multiple applications.
Yes, and have this sort of in a standard way or in a blast way, or if we do something in the future, likewise for others, then also reusing this very same tag and not reinventing a different one.
Yeah.
So you're talking about not having it housed under the metrics Git, but actually overall the main to be used by all the other extensions.
That wasn't a relevant statement, but so
I'm thinking about usability for other extensions.
What it looks like is that there is no breaking change to the existing format. It would just simply be the addition of another label.
Yes.
That's right, yeah.
I don't see the downside of that. I mean, I understand the larger conversation about whether or not we want to support multiple app stuff and blah, 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 but the additional label doesn't seem to be, a hardship.
Right.
Yeah, I think what this would kind of boil down to is you would see, by default, an application provider or app server provider that could support multiple apps would add that tag, and it could be overridden by a particular MP config property if people wanted to set it. Or even on a single server deployment, if you wanted to set it purposely, you could do it. So that's where it would actually show up in our spec and in our externals, right? So people could be aware of its existence, which I don't want to hide that. But as far as where the tag goes, it's just alongside all the other tags that exist.
Can I ask you a question? Well, of course I can ask a question. The question is there a scenario where, say you have 5 single app servers and you've got 2 multi-app servers and you want the app label across them all because it's obviously useful for a portion of it, and since that will be in your dashboard, you want a significant label for everything. Because, once it's a standard label that you're using, it's a standard label, and you would probably need all your microservices to use it.
Yeah. Yeah, today, I mean, we already do have a tag that I should say a config property that you can set for MicroProfile, metrics tags. And that does have the result of adding another tag. You can set whatever name you want, whatever value you want. So in theory, you could do that today, right? You could actually just say, you could even call it app if you wanted to. But the point is, obviously, it's in a multi-server environment, that's sort of inconvenient because it's a server-wide setting to set that value. So I can easily say app equals core banking, and I could do that across my 20 different servers that all have something to do with core banking, and they would all get that label. And then if you want to do aggregations in Grafana, you want to do queries in Grafana of the metrics, sum up all the hit counts across all servers that have core banking in the app. It can do that, and we can do that today, right? It's just this is a bit different because it gives you app awareness from the server itself to actually fill that tag in, and it's not a server-wide setting. So
yes.
Is it possible to have a deployed service which is used as a component in more than one application, where I could imagine a sort of a service name, and maybe an application name could almost be a function of an open tracing tag or something like that?
not sure I get that. If it's a shared library or a jar file that's shared by two applications, then metrics emitted from that should get the application label from the respective application.
What I was thinking of was a microservice that's running in a server, but that microservice is used as a component in more than one constellation of services which make up an application.
And you want to label the microservice, or the component, I should say?
Well, in my head, I differentiate a service instance, and what it is an instance of, from an application which provides some sort of business function, which might be one of the clients of that service, because a service could be part of more than one application.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you could use the global tag for saying this is part of your core banking, and then you might have 5 apps, and each of those apps gets another tag that says which specific app it is within core
we're
banking.
deep in a technical core decision, which takes longer than our meeting, I predict. So we should probably defer this to another meeting.
Yeah, well, so
Mark here.
Okay, yep, hi Mark. So what I was hearing, and I don't know, maybe I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, but I kind of saw or heard that the use of this app tag for metrics would be an okay thing to move forward with. And if and when there's additional application of this, whether it's to Open API or Open Tracing or something like that, then that's where this current usage would set a precedence, and we could propose it, promote it to the future usage. But it seems like it would be a useful item for metrics.
Yes, and it doesn't have a breaking change, and this is why it's being considered as a potential value, as an extension of metrics for the moment. When I asked that how we will use it in other extensions, we didn't get to that answer. So yes, Kevin, you got it.
But how about others? I mean, Don and Heiko, what were you expecting to get out of this discussion?
What you just said.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is anybody allergic to app names? Basically, that's the point.
No, I think it's probably, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said so far. To me, it seems fine because we're not breaking or dramatically changing the way you consume data just because there is an additional label.
Right.
Could it not be called service name, though?
Yeah. No, application name would be my preference. This is Steve. I know this is kind of the first time I've chimed in. Let's just say I'm coming in from the DevOps side of things, and application name would be very much preferred for DevOps statistics, at least for any site I've worked at.
Because you can tie it back to the application that you know of.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, the important issue here is that we have to start thinking about service mesh deployments. I mean, I don't agree that we've ever had a mandate that we were talking about microservices in silos. I mean, that frankly makes no sense. So we really need to be servicing these use cases that are having impacts on service meshes and what the requirements are in the MicroProfile specifications.
Yeah. And
the DevOps perspective is fundamental in a microservice service mesh.
And Scott, I think that's a valid point, and I think it's something that, I think it was even Amelia that mentioned it earlier, is that, raising this up to a higher level is probably part of the architecture discussions that we've been having.
Correct.
But is there any dissension about the metrics team going forward with their current usage for, the next release of metrics 2.0?
No, but I think the fallout should be that we create an architectural issue, an architectural group issue that references this, so we start collecting those service mesh related use cases. Because I mean, one thing we've been struggling with in architecture group is that there's so many service meshes that we can't find common ground. So we need to start collecting the use cases that define, you know, where can we actually find MicroProfile specific or relevant aspects to simplify service mesh deployments.
Yep. Okay, so Don or Heiko, can I ask you to take care of creating an issue at our architecture level?
Yes, sure.
You can even add the link to these minutes, and it will say, hey, this is the forum. Just make sure that we know that there is trace of everything. Just don't create that for us. Once you throw that, it's going to be thrown back at you. At least if I am in the call. You know it.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, good. So that's giving us about 20 minutes. I know it's a little bit less than what they were hoping for, but let me give you a little bit of an introduction. This Boost plugin that we've been working on, I mean, you know, to be honest, we've been calling it the Liberty Boost plugin, but as we continued to work with this, we determined that this was actually applicable across multiple application servers. I believe the demo that we're going to be having today will even demonstrate how it can easily be used with Tommy. And so I kind of look at it as a logical extension to what we started with the starter. So, you know, the starter gives an easy way of starting to use MicroProfile APIs with the various application servers and the, you know, the different components that we have. And this could be looked at taking it up a level and saying, okay, now how could I integrate this with all these various application servers and make it very easy to consume and utilize the various application servers that implement MicroProfile. So I know we've got a couple of people on the call. Scott Kurtz from IBM. Some of you may know Scott from the Java batch work. He's been involved in that quite a bit, and then he's been leading some of the effort here on Boost. But I believe it's Adam Wisniewski that's going to be giving the demo today. So Adam, let's see, if I stop sharing, can you take over?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. Thanks, Kevin. Let's see, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So this is just a basic application that demonstrates the MicroProfile REST client technology, and it uses this Boost Maven plugin to manage the lifecycle and the application deployment. So just very basically, the app takes in a URL where you pass in a host name. So in this case, we're going to be using localhost. And it uses the REST client to build a backend URL based on that host name and a port that's configured using a MicroProfile config. And for the sake of this demo, this backend service is running in the same application, the same server, but it could be running anywhere, and you can configure it that way. So just very briefly, so we have our MicroProfile config properties file. So we have this port defined here for a backend system. Has some other stuff in here that we're not going to demo today. And again, just briefly looking at the code without boring you here. So we're consuming this backend system port here. And as you can see down below, we're using the REST client builder to build this host name for this backend system that we're going to be calling. And what this is going to do is it's just going to return the system properties for that host name. So I want to jump over to the POM for this application to kind of demonstrate how this Boost plugin is configured. So the main thing to point out is this list of dependencies that we've created. So these we're calling boosters. So it's basically a list of which technologies you want to use for your runtime and for your application. And the versions of all of these technologies are resolved by one global BOM. So in this case, we're asking for the MicroProfile 2.0 spec. So we want to use those versions for these different technologies. So as you can see, we just simply pull in MicroProfile config, REST client. We're using some other technologies here as well. And we specifically added in JPA, which is pulling in JDBC in the background, just to show some basic persistence and how this works here. One mechanism that we have is a kind of a bring your own database. So you just define, right now we support Derby, DB2, and MySQL. So I'm going to demonstrate how easy it is to switch between using Derby, for example, Derby embedded, and then switching over to MySQL. And lastly, we have in this dependency block a set of runtimes that you can choose. So right now we have Open Liberty and Tommy that we're going to be demonstrating. And so I'm going to start first with Open Liberty. But basically, you want to define your runtime. You just have this one dependency, say Open Liberty. If you want Tommy, you just say Tommy, and you'll get that pulled in, and your application will be deployed to a server that Boost is going to take care of configuring for you. And the last thing here is this plugin definition for the Boost Maven plugin. There's no configuration necessary for this plugin. This is simply all that you need. We're binding to the Maven package lifecycle phase. So I'm going to go ahead and just run this. So let's see where I am here.
Adam, can you make a little bit bigger the font, please?
Yes. Let me see how I can do that here. Sorry, I'm not familiar with that.
Command plus. Try.
Yeah.
Are you on an app? You're on a Mac, so Command
Yes.
plus.
Maybe Control plus.
Or Control Shift Command. It's not Command Shift.
I think that's working.
There we go.
Okay, so we'll go from here.
Thank you.
No problem. So here we're in our application directory here. So we're just going to do, let me just copy and paste so I make sure I get the right command here. So here we're just doing a clean package, and we're passing in a Boost property to set the port for the server. And so this should run fairly quickly, but you can see that we're finding our dependencies. We're pulling down the Liberty server installation. So we're installing that, we're configuring it, and we're deploying our application to it. And so from here, we can do a Maven Boost run. And this is going to start up Open Liberty. Wait for our app to start. Okay. And we can go over to this URL that I was showing you before, and we can hit that. And we can see that we have just a whole garble of system properties here, so nothing too cool to look at. But one thing I want to show is that when we look over in our message log, first off, you can see that we're using Derby embedded for our persistence database. And there's just a simple printout here in our log that's saying that the app was invoked one time for localhost. And so if we go and we hit this URL again, just refreshed a few times, see that we're persisting in our Derby database. So 2 times. We also have just a timestamp of when it was invoked last. So a couple of logging mechanisms there that we're pulling from Derby. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the server here and switch over to use MySQL. So if we go back to our POM, we can just switch from Derby. Let's just comment that out. And we're going to use this MySQL dependency. So very simple change. And we go back here, and since MySQL is going to take a few more parameters here, I'm going to copy this here. So here we have the same port. We're passing in a URL, username and password. And actually, start that. This is going to, again, create our Liberty server, configure it using MySQL data source, and pull in all the dependencies and jars that we need for that. So I'm just going to start up MySQL here so we have the database running. And from here, we can do, just again, same commands. Maven Boost run. Starting Open Liberty again. And we can go, we can hit our app again. And this time in our logs, we can see that we're using MySQL here. And same persistence mechanism here. So we can see that we're again logging how many times we're invoking on this particular host. So the next thing that I wanted to show, so let me stop the server here, is how this works with Tommy and how we can just make one simple change in our POM. So we can just switch from Open Liberty, and now we want to use Tommy. And the same mechanisms apply. We have the same set of dependencies and properties, so it abstracts some of that stuff. And let me save this. And we're going to jump back over here and do another clean package. And I'll try to stop the output here for a second, just so you can see. All right, you see right here, we can see that we're using Tommy for the runtime. So we're pulling down the server, we're installing it, configuring it, deploying our application. And we can again do a Maven Boost run. Start up Tommy. And we can go and follow the same steps here just to refresh our page. And the output is actually going to be over here in the console. And we can see, just make sure I get the right string here, that we're using MySQL. Here we go. So we're using MySQL. Everything's configured for you. And we can see that our app was invoked. And we'll just refresh the page. And we can see that it was invoked a second time. So basically, with just a few changes to your POM, you can switch runtimes, you can switch database vendors, and kind of configure however you want your application. But most importantly, you can pull in these various technologies that you need for your application. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
That looks fantastic. And thank you for the compliment. Thank you for running on Tommy. That was really nice of you.
No problem.
Well, not only that, Adam and Scott, I already took photos. They're going to be tweeted in a moment. It's fascinating, actually.
So basically, just from my understanding, the value proposition here is that you can always run the same Maven Boost whatever commands, no matter what technology or runtime you're using, so that we have one set of instructions throughout the MicroProfile documentation, for example, to run all the servers and technologies.
Yeah, definitely.
Entry point and everything is common on runtimes.
I think there are other advantages, but that is certainly a key one.
Say that again? Sorry, I didn't hear the last thing you said, Alistair.
I'm sorry, I was just saying I think there are other advantages, but that's certainly a key one.
Okay.
So because right now the starter creates a specific POM per specific runtime, so this would do away with that.
It would do away with the need to do that, yes.
Right, okay.
And assuming there was Boost support for that runtime, of which at the moment there's
right. And then this, what you guys just demoed, also, the idea would be to have different, this is specific scenario, right? It's like you have a database and a REST endpoint, and you're pulling in system properties. This is like how to have an application that integrates a database with a microservice. So the idea would be to have multiple like scenarios, and this is just one of them.
Two of them. Scott, Adam, you ran the demo on Liberty and on Tommy, correct? But it could be run in the other applications, or?
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't referring to the runtimes. I was referring to the actual
Yeah, I mean,
use case, yeah.
the vision is to expand and support other runtimes and also to support other technologies. I mean, so if you take open tracing, if there was some kind of, you know, trace prefix, or I forget what would be a useful thing, but, you know, different aspects to the different technologies, we would try to, you know, abstract away the common configuration into these boost properties.
Mm-hmm. The only challenge I see is not accidentally saying boot.
Yeah.
Who named it? What went down?
No, I think boost is my name. I'm just joking.
So that's some, because I came up with the name internally, and I have to say the reason I came up with this was because the chocolate bar in the UK called a Boost, and it tastes awesome. So that was where the name came from. But yes, it is quite similar to that thing, which does have people asking that question.
Then you won us over. You won us over.
So if I were to summarize what I'm looking at, is it looks like you've created something that is the runtime equivalent of Archillion. Basically, the standard way to bootstrap something and get it going. And to me, it looks very, very useful. I mean, like, no one's ever gone, oh, thank goodness I have to configure things totally differently in my Palm with different group IDs. And, oh, this server requires 3 extra dependencies, the other one. No one goes, thank goodness for all that.
There is the cargo moving plugin, but it's pretty much outdated.
Right. I mean, that was kind of part of the thing is, you know, one of the things that people like about Spring is it's like one answer, it's one opinion, and we all have on this call different opinions. And that was really where the genesis of this was, well, what if we could all come to a single agreed view? And then when we go out and talk at conferences and say, this is the best way to build your MicroProfile application, we're all talking about the same developer experience rather than subtly different ones.
Right, and different in ways that don't add value.
Yep.
If we went with this approach, wouldn't it become a blocker in the sense that all the versions of different specs and everything are bundled into this? So it's an extra hoop to go through before we can release?
So possibly, but I'm going to go with no, because at the moment we don't stop a release based on the fact that there's no actual implementation that's released. So if you go to start.microprofile.io, it does not mention MicroProfile 2.2. And when we released MicroProfile 2.2, there weren't any implementations on that day, but they came later.
Maybe not a blocker on a release, but blocker being added to starter, because at the moment the only blocker is that we have 2 implementations for a new spec. But we'd have to wait for this to be updated for everything, and it looks like possibly as well versions of different runtimes to include. So I'm just concerned that this is adding another layer to things that I'm not sure if it adds a huge enough value to warrant that.
Well, I think what you've said is on the assumption, which we haven't discussed so far, on the assumption that we stop doing starter that the way we're doing it now, and this could be in addition to rather than instead of.
Or complement to.
That's what I mean. It could, you know, there could be a check mark on there that has, you know, a boost based version of the sample.
So with every release, you would have to have a, whatever you call this tool, a boost release, right? Also.
Well, I don't know that. So you guys can answer that question, and I wanted to raise a point in addition to Ken's, which is, or rather a point, but question. I don't know what it is exactly the way to think about it, but in the Archillion world, the maintenance of implementing the adapter is successfully pushed onto the implementation. and that's how it scales, right? So there isn't like one team that has to write all the adapters. And is that something that would work for this, such as, I mean, we could even, would that work here, that everyone maintains their own goop to get it to work behind this abstraction? Does what I said even make sense?
I was waiting for Adam or...
I think it does. So contrary to Archillian, there's sort of two different sort of channels we have to maintain, right? One is the spec. Whenever there's a new spec update, we have to create a new BOM that then versions the boosters correctly to pull in the new spec dependencies. The other is the runtime, which is more the parallel that you're drawing to Archillian. And those things can be done, I believe, separately, independently from one another. I don't think if it's like unless there's certain things that we have to change in the actual configuration of the different technologies that is significant, then I don't expect we would need updates to the actual plugin in order to take advantage of the new spec level. We could just do like a separate BOM release. And then in terms of the technologies, and how the implementation detail for each runtime, internally that code currently is already, we already have the vision that, that code can be sort of maintained independently for each runtime. But maybe there needs to be some more improvement in that area to make it more sort of adaptable, like you're saying, with the Archillian containers.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily looking for value add opportunities, but just to make sure that one team doesn't get overloaded and overworked. You know what I mean?
So I guess we're running out of time. So I guess I'm just kind of wondering, I don't know if we can make a decision here, but are we interested in pursuing this as a possible addition to our arsenal? I mean, to go ahead and kind of like what we did with Starter, is get it into a sandbox. And
that's a clear yes for me.
Yeah, I recommend that Adam and the team starts a thread, and we do a sandbox, and then we write a blog.
We got a lot of people here, so.
No, but this is what we need to do, the same process as we do a startup. They have presented the demo. Now they need to educate. That means blog, and then start a thread, immediately a thread. And Kevin,
you're spending the last 2 minutes. So Red Hat people, Payara people, any other people, Cumulisi people, what do you think? Do you like it too?
Personally, right now, I'd say no. But I'm going to talk to others and see if they have different views.
How about Kenji from Fujitsu? Kenji, you are here. What do you think?
Yes, I like this.
Hey, Kenji, good. Independence. We have Alberto. We have Brazil. What's going on?
They're quiet.
About the demo, I think that is a really great. It's a great changer feature. When I moved from different application servers in the past, it was really painful and have a lot of dependencies that changed. So what I look is like an amazing feature, is what I can say about the community, or that we use application services.
Yeah, for me as an outsider, if I have to show to maybe a company, a client, about how easy it is to switch vendors for MicroProfile, I think this would really help, because I don't have to kind of rebuild or re-download the POMs for the different implementations.
Yeah, exactly.
It might be of some value.
Mm-hmm. So then usually we will do the same. Can we follow the same process as we did with MicroProfile? Started the demo has been presented. We're going to start a sandbox, and then everything will be open, gets in blog. Who will own the blog? You can write an issue and say, I will own this blog. If you don't, if the project doesn't educate the community, you are going to fail. You cannot sell it because we're not going to speak for you. Can someone say, I will write? Is there Adam, Scott? What's going on?
I'll own the blog. I'd be happy to. This is Scott.
There we go.
Awesome, Scott.
Okay. Okay, and then, and I think you guys heard too, I mean, we got to start a thread on the MicroProfile forum and get that conversation going. So otherwise, thank you very much for the demo. I think it was very educational. Thanks.
Yeah, I would probably use it myself.
It was fantastic.
Great.
Thank you.
Look forward to it. Yep. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so that will end today's meeting, and we'll meet again in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.